Hello students and welcome to another episode of Our Environment. Today we'll gather some more knowledge about our ecosystem. No species or organism can live alone. There always exist associations which influence each other. The self-sustaining association of plants or animals and the physical environment in which they live form an ecosystem. The term ecosystem is derived from the Greek terminology wherein eco means environment and system means interacting and interdependent complex.
Ecosystem. Plants and animals do not exist independent of one another. They live in close association with each other. The various communities of living organisms like plants and animals interact among themselves as well as their physical environment like soil, air and water. The living organisms interact with one another through their food chains in which one organism consumes another organism. The living organisms like plants interact with soil to get essential nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus and so on, with air to get carbon dioxide and with water bodies for carrying out the process of photosynthesis. Thus the various communities of living organisms like plants and animals, along with soil, air and water of that region, form a self-sustaining or functional unit of the living world. This functional unit or system, made up of living and non-living components, which is capable of independent existence, is called an ecosystem. An ecosystem needs only the input of solar energy for its functioning. An ecosystem as a self-contained unit of living things like producers as plants, primary consumers as herbivores, top consumers as carnivores, and decomposers as bacteria and fungus, and their abiotic components which include soil, air and water. Ecosystem is a dynamic network of interactions between the living and the non-living components.
So we come to know that ecosystem is an open system which requires regular input of energy and circulation of matter for its sustenance. Ecosystem can be big or small, natural or artificial, permanent or temporary. Now let us study more about types of ecosystems.
Types of ecosystem. Types of ecosystem on basis of their nature. Natural ecosystem, artificial ecosystem. Natural ecosystem can be of three types. Terrestrial ecosystems, which include grassland ecosystems, forest ecosystems, and desert ecosystems. Freshwater ecosystems, including river ecosystems, pond ecosystems, and lake ecosystems. Marine ecosystem, including coastal areas and open oceans. It is the largest and most uniform aquatic ecosystem. Artificial ecosystems are created and maintained by human beings. In these ecosystems, humans maintain the natural balance by the addition of energy and planned manipulations. Examples are croplands, parks, kitchen gardens, and aquaria. Types of ecosystem on basis of duration. Temporary ecosystem, permanent ecosystem, temporary ecosystem. These are short-lived ecosystems which may be natural or man-made. For example, rain-fed pond or laboratory culture of protozoas. Permanent ecosystem These are self-supporting natural ecosystems that maintain themselves for relatively long duration. For example, lake, forest, and desert.
Students, now you tell me, in which ecosystem do you live? Or to which ecosystem does your kitchen garden belong? From now on, wherever you go, try to observe the ecosystems in your surroundings. As is clear from the definition of the ecosystem, it has two main components: the living, that is biotic, and the non-living, that is abiotic. So we can say that the ecosystem consists of the non-living environment and the living biological community.
Abiotic components. The abiotic or the non-living components of an ecosystem include the physico-chemical factors of the environment, inorganic substances, for example, hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, calcium, and phosphorus. These occur either in the form of compounds dissolved in water, in the soil, or in free state in air. Organic compounds, for example, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. These are present in living organisms and dead organic matter. Climatic factors include soil, topography, minerals, pH, light, temperature, humidity, wind, rainfall, and water. Biotic components. The biotic or the living components of an ecosystem are a community of organisms like plants and animals which are made up of many different interdependent populations. In short, the assemblage of populations of different living organisms present in an ecosystem is called a biotic community. The different members of biotic community are connected, and most important relationship is of food. Food consists of both matter and energy.
Biotic components include all organisms, but they differ in their ways of acquiring nutrition. Some are able to produce their own food, while others cannot. On the basis of the method of acquiring food, organisms in an ecosystem are classified into three main categories: plants, that is producers; animals, that is consumers; and microorganisms, that is decomposers. All of them have a role in making the ecosystem function as a stable unit.
Producer organisms, autotrophs. Those organisms which produce food are called producers. Producers are the organisms which can prepare their own food from carbon dioxide and water by using sunlight energy in the presence of chlorophyll, and produce carbohydrates by photosynthesis, and also synthesize proteins and fats. Thus, the green plants are called producers in the living world. The examples of producers are green plants and certain blue-green algae. Producers are the autotrophic in the ecosystem upon which other organisms depend for food. Thus, producers like green plants are autotrophs. Consumer organisms, heterotrophs. Consumer organisms, heterotrophs. These are mainly the animals. They are unable to synthesize their food, so they utilize materials stored by the producers or even consume other organisms. On basis of that, consumers are further subdivided into three types: primary consumers or herbivores, secondary consumers or carnivores, tertiary consumers. Primary consumers, herbivores. Some animals eat only plants or their products. Those animals which eat only plants are called herbivores. The herbivores may eat grasses, leaves, grains, fruits, or the bark of trees. Some of the examples of primary consumers are cow, deer, monkey, rabbit, mice, grasshoppers, and aquatic animals like snails, mosquito larvae, and tortoises, which eat plants and plant products. Secondary consumers, carnivores. Those animals which eat only other animals as food are called carnivores. The small carnivores which feed on herbivores or primary consumers are called secondary consumers. Some of the examples of secondary consumers or carnivores are dogs, cats, foxes, and aquatic animals like frogs, small fishes, and water bugs. Tertiary consumers, carnivores. They do not eat plant food at all. The carnivores eat the meat of other animals. So we can also say that those animals which eat only the meat of other animals are called carnivores. The large carnivores or top carnivores which feed upon the small carnivores are lion, tiger, and humans. Terrestrial animals like snakes and aquatic animals like large fishes and water dolphin, which feed on secondary consumers, are also tertiary consumers. Role of consumers. Herbivores control the population of producers and carnivores control the population of herbivores. Omnivores switch to various food habits according to availability of food and thus regulate or balance the disturbance in the food chain.
We saw that green plants and some bacteria use raw materials from nature to synthesize their food and meet their energy requirements, while other organisms who cannot make their food depend on producers for their nutrients. Thus, nature is the source of raw materials to all, and its reserves might come to an end someday. Have you ever thought what will happen after that? But nature already has a mechanism to get back its reserves from dead plants and animals. And here comes the role of decomposers. Had it not been for the decomposers, plants would not get their essential nutrients and dead matter and waste would be piling up.
Decomposer organisms, saprotrophs. These organisms obtain food from the organic materials of dead producers and consumers and their waste products. Certain bacteria and fungi are decomposers. The bacteria and fungi which act as decomposers are called putrefying bacteria. The bacteria and fungi act as decomposers by the secretions of their body surfaces which decompose the organic matter present in dead plants and animals into simpler substances for their own maintenance and release the remaining into the soil, water and air to be used by the producers again. The decomposers are also known as microconsumers or saprotrophs. Role of decomposers. The decomposers play yet another vital role in cycling of materials. After the death of producers and consumers, the decomposers decompose the organic material and release the components or nutrients back to the abiotic world. The activity maintains the element's concentration, balance in the nature, and so help the cycle of life to continue.
Students, after knowing about producers, consumers and decomposers, you must be clear with the differences between them. Like, producers can convert light energy into chemical energy. Consumers get chemical energy from outside. And decomposers liberate inorganic nutrients and create space for newer generations. Now, let us study about the importance of decomposers in an ecosystem.
Importance of decomposers. The decomposers help in decomposing the dead bodies of plants and animals, and hence act as cleansing agents of the environment. The decomposers also help in putting back the various elements of which the dead plants and animals are made back into the soil, air and water for reuse by the producers like crop plants. This maintains the fertility of the soil, and the soil would continue to support crops again and again. For example, in the nitrogen cycle, the decomposers like putrefying bacteria and fungi decompose the dead plants and animal bodies into ammonia and other simpler substances. This ammonia is converted into nitrites and nitrates by the nitrifying bacteria present in the soil. These nitrates act as fertilizer in the soil and are again absorbed by the plants for their growth. Thus, it is only due to the presence of decomposers that the various nutrient elements which were initially taken by plants from the soil, air and water are returned to the soil, air and water after the death of plants and animals. The decomposer organisms help in recycling the ecosystem so that the process of life may go on and on like an unending chain.
By now we know which are the biotic and abiotic components of an ecosystem. Next time you go to a garden, try to study its various living components and find out producers, consumers at different levels and decomposers. Now, let us study why an ecosystem is said to be self-sufficient or an independent unit in nature.
Functioning of ecosystem. Ecosystem functions as a self-sufficient or independent unit in nature. An ecosystem has non-living components like soil, water and air, which contain inorganic nutrient elements, and the living components called producers, consumers and decomposer organisms. All these components make the ecosystem function. From the nutrient pool of the Earth's soil, water and air, carbon dioxide and water are absorbed by the producer organisms like green plants with the help of sunlight and in the presence of chlorophyll. The producers convert these inorganic substances into organic compounds like carbohydrates, which act as a food and oxygen. This oxygen is released back into the atmosphere, which is used by humans and animals during respiration. Thus, producers trap the solar energy and then prepare the basic food or energy for all other lives in the ecosystem. The consumers, that is, animals, derive their energy needs directly or indirectly from producers, that is, plants. When the producers and consumers die, then the decomposer organisms act on their dead bodies to return the various elements back to the nutrient pool, that is, soil, water and air. Thus, an ecosystem involves input of matter, which is exchanged between living and non-living components in a cyclic process. But energy does not flow in a cyclic process. It flows in a unidirectional manner. Recap. Students, in this episode we learnt about the functional unit capable of independent existence, that is, ecosystem. Types of ecosystem on basis of its nature, size and duration. Components of an ecosystem, that is, biotic, which includes producers, consumers and decomposers, and abiotic components. How ecosystem functions to maintain balance between biotic and abiotic components.
With this special information about the ecosystem, we come to the end of today's program. But do not miss our next program, in which we will discuss how biotic components in an ecosystem are linked together by food chain. Till then, goodbye.